The town of Brooksville was the kind of place where everyone knew each other by name and strangers stood out immediately. Life moved slowly there, and people often described it as the kind of town where nothing bad ever really happened. That illusion shattered in the summer of 1994 when Emily Cartwright, a 25-year-old nurse, failed to return home after a night shift. Emily was well liked by colleagues and neighbors, known for her kindness and dedication. She lived alone in a small apartment near the hospital, and her routines were so consistent that when she didn't show up for her scheduled shift the following morning, people noticed immediately. The first sign something was wrong came when her car was discovered abandoned on a desolate back road just outside town. It was unusual for her to take that route, as it was known for being poorly lit and rarely traveled after dark. The car itself told a chilling story. The engine was off, but the headlights were still glowing, cutting through the thick early morning fog. Inside the vehicle, Emily's purse sat untouched on the passenger seat, containing her wallet, identification, and cash. The driver's side door was slightly ajar, as if she had stepped out in a hurry or been pulled away. When police arrived, they found one detail that sent chills through everyone who heard about it. A single line of footprints led away from the car and into the woods. The ground was soft from recent rain, so the impressions were clear at first. But after a short distance, the trail stopped suddenly, as if Emily had simply vanished. There were no tire tracks suggesting another vehicle, no sign of a struggle, and no additional footprints. Search dogs were brought in and picked up her scent briefly, but it faded near a cluster of pine trees and could not be traced any further. News of Emily's disappearance spread quickly, and soon the small town was consumed with fear. Parents kept their children indoors, and women avoided going out alone at night. Volunteers and law enforcement launched one of the largest search efforts the town had ever seen. Hundreds of people scoured the woods, the fields, and the back roads, calling her name and hoping to stumble across some clue. Helicopters circled overhead, while divers searched nearby lakes and rivers. Despite their efforts, there was no trace of Emily beyond that abandoned car and the footprints that ended without explanation. As days turned into weeks, theories began to circulate. Some believed she had been abducted by someone passing through town, perhaps a truck driver or drifter who knew how to disappear without leaving a trail. Others thought she might have been lured away by someone she knew, someone who understood her routine well enough to intercept her on that lonely road. The absence of evidence only made the mystery more unsettling. For the people of Brooksville, Emily's vanishing marked the end of their sense of safety. Once trusting community now looked at each other with suspicion. Neighbors locked their doors at night, and every unfamiliar car was reported to police. The unanswered questions haunted everyone, but the most disturbing thought was the simplest. Emily hadn't just left. Something had taken her, and no one knew if it would happen again. 5 years passed before Brooksville was reminded of Emily Cartwright's disappearance in the most chilling way possible. In 1999, a young couple purchased a weathered house on Lantern Street, a 2-story building that had been left empty for years. On the surface, it was nothing more than a fixer-upper, peeling paint, broken windows, and a collapsing porch. But to the couple, it was an affordable chance to start fresh. They set to work cleaning and renovating, pulling down old wallpaper, fixing floors, and repairing the structure. It was during these renovations that the house began to reveal its secret. While tearing down a section of wall in one of the upstairs rooms, the new owners discovered something strange. Behind layers of plaster and wood, they uncovered what seemed to be a hollow space. The gap was too small to make sense as part of the house's design, and when they widened the hole, it revealed a hidden room sealed off and untouched for who knows how long. The smell that poured out was overwhelming, a mix of rot, mold, and something far worse. Alarmed, the couple contacted the authorities, and soon the property was swarming with investigators. The hidden chamber was like stepping into a nightmare frozen in time. A rotting mattress lay in the corner, stained and filthy, suggesting someone had been forced to live there under horrific conditions. Clothing items were scattered across the floor, women's blouses, shoes, and even undergarments, none belonging to the current owners. But the most disturbing discovery was pinned along the walls. Dozens of photographs, many faded with age, showed young women in distressing conditions, their faces pale and eyes vacant. Among them, investigators recognized Emily Cartwright. It was the first concrete evidence that she hadn't simply disappeared into the night. She had been held here in this house, no more than a mile from where she had lived. The revelation shocked the town. The idea that Emily had been alive after her disappearance, kept hidden in a house right under their noses, was more horrifying than anyone could comprehend. Forensic teams combed every inch of the hidden room. They found strands of hair, traces of blood, and signs of prolonged confinement. It was clear this space had been used for more than one victim. Yet, there were no bodies. Whoever had built the chamber had taken great care to conceal what truly happened inside. The owners of the house moved out almost immediately, unable to bear what they had uncovered. The case, long considered cold, suddenly roared back to life, and investigators worked tirelessly to piece together who had lived there before and what secrets the property still held. Records showed that the house had passed through several hands over the years, but one name stood out: Arthur Delaney, a man known for keeping to himself and rarely interacting with neighbors. Though he had moved away years earlier, suspicion began to circle around him. The discovery at Lantern Street marked a turning point. Emily's disappearance was no longer an isolated tragedy, but part of something far larger and more sinister. The house was a monument to hidden suffering. A reminder that while the town had been searching the forests and rivers, the answers had been locked away behind a wall in an ordinary neighborhood home. When investigators searched deeper into the Lantern Street house, they discovered an old wooden trunk wedged in the back of the closet inside the sealed room. It was locked, heavy and covered in dust, as if it had not been touched in years. Breaking it open revealed its disturbing contents. Dozens of unmarked VHS tapes, each numbered with a small piece of masking tape, but with no titles or descriptions. The discovery immediately raised fears about what might be on them, and the police set up special equipment to view the footage in private. What they saw would scar even seasoned investigators. The tapes opened with grainy, poorly lit scenes of the same hidden chamber that had been found behind the wall. The rotting mattress and bare walls were unmistakable. But the focus of the recordings was not the room itself. It was the women inside it. Each tape documented a different woman sitting silently, often bound or looking too weak to resist. Sometimes they appeared confused, sometimes terrified, but in every case, their despair was visible. The camera never lingered on violence directly, but the conditions told their own story. The women were being held captive, their freedom stolen from them for months at a time. One of the tapes featured Emily Cartwright. She was older than in her missing posters, her face thinner, her expression hollow. She sat against the wall, staring blankly at the camera. Investigators paused the tape, studying every detail, hoping for a clue to her fate. But the recording ended abruptly, the screen cutting to static before any answers could be found. The figure behind the camera was never fully shown. At times, a shadow would pass across the lens, or a hand would appear briefly while adjusting the tripod. He rarely spoke, but once, a faint whistle could be heard, a strange habit that sent chills through the room. Detectives began to refer to the unknown man as the Whistler, though the media continued to call him the Collector. The final tape in the trunk was unlike the others. Instead of focusing on a victim, the camera shifted its gaze to a corner of the room. Slowly, the view tilted down, revealing a wooden door low to the ground, secured with a heavy padlock. Investigators were stunned, because there had been no basement entrance in the Lantern Street house. This door didn't exist within the property as they knew it. The tape ended there, leaving behind only more questions. The discovery of the tapes deepened the nightmare. It proved that Emily and others had been alive for some time, confined and filmed like unwilling subjects in some twisted collection. It also suggested that the Lantern Street house was not the only place used for these crimes. Somewhere out there was another location, hidden and waiting to be found, possibly holding the answers to what truly happened to Emily and the other women. The tapes became the darkest evidence the case had produced, but they also became a roadmap hinting that the terror stretched far beyond the walls of one house. The attic of the Lantern Street house was cluttered with dust-covered boxes, broken furniture, and scraps of old newspapers. Investigators had combed through it several times without finding much of value until one officer noticed a loose floorboard in the corner. Beneath it, wrapped in layers of cloth, was a weathered notebook. Inside were pages filled with sketches, numbers, and strange markings that looked like a personal code. Most of it appeared meaningless at first, but near the back was something far more revealing: a hand-drawn map. It depicted Brooksville and its surrounding areas, with several properties marked with red XS. Some were remote farmhouses, others old barns, and a few were isolated cabins scattered deep in the woods. The map was quickly labeled by investigators as a collector's map, a chilling blueprint of his hunting grounds. Teams were dispatched to every marked location. What they found was worse than anyone had anticipated. At the first property, an abandoned farmhouse on the edge of town, they discovered another hidden chamber, eerily similar to the one behind the wall on Lantern Street. The same setup was there: a thin mattress, restraints, and personal items left behind. But no victims remained. Instead, there were scraps of jewelry, torn photographs, and articles of clothing. The eerie sense that people had once been trapped there was inescapable. As investigators moved to other sites, the pattern repeated. Each property bore evidence of captivity, but no trace of the missing women themselves. Some rooms contained children's toys, raising disturbing questions about whether younger victims had also been targeted. At one cabin, they found a drawer filled with identification cards, licenses, and even bus tickets belonging to people no one in Brooksville recognized. Many of these individuals had likely been drifters, travelers, or those without close family ties, people whose disappearances would not have caused the same alarm as Emily's. The scope of the crimes began to take shape. Emily Cartwright's case was not an isolated event, but one of many. The collector had carefully chosen his victims, selecting those who could vanish without immediate suspicion. This explained why Emily's disappearance had drawn so much attention compared to others. She was deeply rooted in the community, and her absence could not be ignored. The realization that there may have been dozens more victims unsettled the town and the investigators alike. Forensic teams collected DNA samples from each location, uncovering evidence that linked back to multiple unidentified women. In some cases, traces of blood were found; in others, hair or clothing fibers. What frightened investigators most was the sheer organization of it all. The collector had maintained several properties, each designed for the same purpose. He was not impulsive, but methodical, leaving behind a network of hidden horrors that stretched far beyond what anyone imagined. The collector's map transformed the case into something far larger than Brooksville. It suggested a calculated predator who had operated for years across multiple sites. And yet, despite the discoveries, the most pressing question remained unanswered. Where were the bodies? Without them, closure was impossible, and the scale of his crimes remained only partially understood. The search intensified, but so did the fear that the truth would be far darker than anyone was prepared to face. In 2003, nearly a decade after Emily Cartwright first vanished, the most disturbing revelation of all came to light. A group of construction workers were clearing land on an overgrown farm just outside Brooksville. The property had once belonged to Arthur Delaney, a reclusive man who had died 2 years earlier from a sudden illness. He had been largely forgotten by the community, remembered only as a quiet figure who kept to himself. But as the workers began digging into the soil to prepare the foundation for a new building, their shovels struck something that was not rock or wood. What they uncovered would unravel the darkest chapter in Brooksville's history. The first shallow grave contained bones. Investigators were called immediately, and soon the farm was cordoned off as teams began a meticulous excavation. One grave became 2, then 3, until the count reached 12. Each grave held skeletal remains, many with personal belongings buried alongside them: rings, shoes, bracelets, and scraps of clothing. It was clear that these were not random burials. They were deliberate, hidden, and intended never to be found. Forensic analysis confirmed what investigators had long feared. The remains belonged to multiple women who had been missing for years. Some had never even been reported in Brooksville, further proving that the collector had chosen victims whose disappearances would go unnoticed. Dental records, DNA testing, and the personal items buried with the bodies helped identify a few, but most remained nameless, reduced to fragments of lives erased by a predator. Among the remains, however, one person was missing: Emily Cartwright. The evidence on the farm tied everything back to Arthur Delaney. His DNA was found on items in the Lantern Street house, as well as at several of the marked properties from the collector's map. Investigators now knew beyond doubt that Delaney was the collector. He had maintained multiple sites of captivity, recorded his victims, and buried them on land he owned, all while living quietly in the same community that searched for answers. He had blended into the background so successfully that no one suspected him during the years of investigation. Yet despite the horrifying discoveries, the most unsettling truth remained unresolved. Emily's body was not among those in the shallow graves. Her belongings had been found in the Lantern Street house, and she had appeared on the tapes, but her final fate was never revealed. Some speculated that she may have been one of the earliest victims and was buried elsewhere in a location yet undiscovered. Others believed she might have escaped scarred but alive, vanishing under a new identity to distance herself from the horror she endured. Without her remains, the question of her survival remained an enduring mystery. The revelations left Brooksville permanently scarred. What began as a single unexplained disappearance unfolded into one of the most disturbing series of crimes the community and the state had ever known. Even in death, Arthur Delaney left behind unanswered questions. The shallow graves told part of the story, but the missing pieces ensured that the case would haunt Brooksville forever. For many, the most terrifying thought was simple: if Emily wasn't in those graves, where was she? And was there more still waiting to be uncovered beneath the quiet soil of the town?